In business, we are confronted with both moral and legal questions. Those that choose to do the right thing are not always noticed. Those who choose to work outside the boundaries of law and ethics are well known. Welcome to BUL3130 Business Law and Ethics. Professor Thornton will be here momentarily.
Good morning, students. Welcome to this week's lecture for BUL3130. This week we're taking a look at criminal law. We're going to spend some time going through it, discussing the various points of it, how it applies to businesses. All right, so let's go ahead and get this going. Let me share PowerPoint with you. All right, so when we think about what business law is, we cannot think about business law without thinking about the things that businesses do that will get them in the news, get them recognized for the wrong ways. All right, so as the introduction says to the videos, when you're watching these two lectures, in the business world, we have good actors and bad actors, and we don't necessarily always know the ones who are doing everything right. We don't hear about them quite as much unless we hear about how their finances are doing well, their sales, or whatever it may be. But we definitely hear about those who do not do as they should. All right. So the ones who are, violating the law in some way or their ethical standards in some way, we hear about those on a regular basis, unfortunately. So as we venture into the business world and becoming managers, business owners, administrators, whatever it may be that you do, it's important to understand how the law applies to businesses and how businesses maintain rights and what can happen if you have employees that do not do as they're supposed to and you're not doing anything about it. All right, so we're going to talk about what the nature of crime is. We'll discuss those pieces just so you kind of have an understanding of what crime is. And then we'll go through a few various crimes that happen with businesses and against businesses, some of those defenses, and what criminal procedure is. So criminal law is designed to prevent harm to society. All right. That is your basic idea of what criminal law is. We have statutes. All criminal law is covered under statutes. Those statutes will state what the law is, what the crime is, and how that crime is punished. So in criminal law, we have punishment. We do not necessarily we're not looking at liability in the sense that we will as we study intentional torts and so on next week. We're looking at when someone is guilty of a crime and what that means. But to get to that point, we need to understand what it takes to show that we have a crime that has happened. All right, so we need to have some type of act, a wrongful act that has happened toward an individual, toward a business. But ultimately, in criminal law, we're looking at a wrongful act that has happened towards society. In some way, society has been harmed. That's the reason that in criminal law, it's the state or the government that brings the charges instead of it being a suit filed by an individual against another individual or a business. With criminal law, the statute that is violated is under the purview of the government that created that statute, and so they will then bring charges based upon that statute because the perpetrator of the crime or the alleged perpetrator of the crime has committed some wrong in the eyes of the government, in the eyes of the state, against society and their rules for society. So first we have to have that wrongful act or the actus reus. The actus reus is simply a wrongful act. Okay, so don't think too hard about these terms. Just understand that you need to know these terms. Actus reus is the wrongful act, but just doing an act is not necessarily enough. We need to understand if there was some type of intent or mental fault at play, and that's the mens rea. that guilty mind or that criminal mind that we look at when it comes to the thinking behind the commission of the act that violated the statute. So we have the act that violates the statute, but then we need to understand the thinking behind that act. What caused that act? Was this because of a set intent to violate this crime, or was it based upon some other uh, fault of the mind that caused them to do this? So, to be convicted of a crime, other than a crime that involves a strict liability issue, the state needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that one, there was an intention to commit the act, and two, there was the act that was committed. So intent and action, those two things will go together when we think about what crime is and how the state will look at crime and what is going on and how they build their case and what they're looking for. So the crime itself, the act, and then the intent for that act to be done. Some ways of looking at mental fault, when we think about what that is, we have subjective fault. This is going to be where you have purposeful, knowing, and reckless activity. So there's some intent involved here. Then you have a negligent, careless type fault. That's an objective fault. That's careless driving, issuing bad checks. Larceny and embezzlement are your examples of subjective fault. And then liability without fault. These are ones that businesses normally will be charged and have some penalty involved, even if there is a individual that's arrested for it as an employee, because this is one of those areas where the business is supposed to be the one making sure these rules are followed. So with liability without fault or a strict liability issue when it comes to crime, can be the sale of alcohol to a minor by a bar, by a store, or whatever it may be. How we have laws in society that prevent someone giving alcohol to a minor. There's also those laws that prevent the sale of these type substances to minors. And that you could add tobacco into that too, because it falls into that same realm. The charge for that would be a charge for the sale of alcohol to a minor on the individual who committed the crime, but also the business. For a business to be able to sell alcohol, they have to have a license to do so. They can lose their license because of the infraction from someone who sold that alcohol. When we have adulterated foods or foods that are spoiled or in some way not fit for sale, we have the same type thinking. That is where there was a decision to put out something that was spoiled, or maybe it was doctored in some way to prevent the knowledge of it being spoiled, or simply it could be that it was left beyond its expiration date in a food service type setting and it caused someone to get sick. These are all things that you're supposed to follow strict rules behind. Anyone who has a food handler's license, they understand that you have to know your dates, know your temperatures. You have to make sure that everything is maintained according to what the standard is or what the procedure is set up by the Department of Health, who would come in and check that. There has to be a certain temperature. I remember when I was managing a small grocery store at one time, we would go around with we have thermometers on our cold cases, but we would also go around with a thermometer or a infrared and check the temperature in each one of the cases. So if that thermometer on the case said that it was running at 30 degrees, we wanted to make sure that that was true and it wasn't some malfunction with the thermometer. You know, the store I managed, it was built upon an older store. So it was where a store had been renovated, and the cases still had some of the old dial type where you looked at a dial. So those would get stuck or those would malfunction. To where now most of the newer cases and newer stores, they have digital readouts, but those can still malfunction depending upon where that sensor is at. It could be showing a warmer or colder temperature than what the case actually is. when you're checking those, it needs to be that top part, what the immediate item that's going to be picked up is. If we did not maintain that and follow it, we stood the chance of selling milk that maybe was beginning to spoil or maybe already was spoiled. And those type of things not only hurt your reputation as a business, that falls back to your ethical standards, but it also can get you in trouble if someone gets sick because they've bought food from your business that was not maintained in the proper way. The reason that sale of alcohol to a minor or the adulterated food or strict liability cases is because you have to follow a set procedure, a set guideline to make sure this is not done. And anyone who would be running a register, a cash register, or anyone who is tasked with stocking those items or presenting those items, they have to follow those procedures. And you, as a business owner or a manager, you're responsible for making sure they're trained to do so and even checking them to make sure that they are doing it. If we go back up to subjective fault, things like larceny and embezzlement, these are individuals who will commit these crimes. And a lot of times those are crimes that are done against businesses and in some cases against individuals, depending upon how it's set up. So those crimes that we were just looking at, they can be classified as a felony or a misdemeanor, depending upon how serious the crime is. So a simple misdemeanor may not, carry so much penalty as, what a felony does. It's not going to carry the high penalty. It's not going to carry likely prison time or high fines that can come with felonies. Misdemeanors can be simple things. Someone getting into a fight that doesn't go to the level of a great bodily harm incident, it could just be a misdemeanor, or that could go up to a felony depending on how serious the crime is. They're based upon the seriousness with certain levels within each one of those classifications. We also have what's called vicarious liability. That's liability imposed for the acts of employees if the employer directed, participated in, or approved of the acts. If we think back to the items in the previous slide, there has to be a effort and a determination by the employer or the business to make sure employees are following the rules in the way they should. A company or a corporation can be found guilty or charged and convicted of crimes, and they're punished by fines. We can't put Walmart in prison, but we can fine them if they're violating certain rules and regulations. Defenses to some of these crimes can be defense of person or property, self-defense issue. Duress is when you're coerced into doing something through threat of serious bodily harm, harm to someone else. But that is not a defense to murder. You cannot say, well, they forced me to kill someone. You have a choice there. You're choosing your life over someone else's when it's not in a armed combat type setting. And so duress does not work in that. Mistake of fact, honest and reasonable belief that conduct is not criminal. You can prove that you did not understand. Someone who maybe is not used to the laws in a certain area, that could be a defense that they have, or someone who is new in a certain area of business, that they may not be fully aware of the rules. Sometimes that could be a defense. It would be one that you would have to really and truly prove. It's one time that the burden of proof would have to lie upon you as a defendant to try to prove that you just did not know. Entrapment is inducement by law enforcement for someone to commit a crime. There are ways that they can catch someone in the commission of an act by using undercover or someone who is working with them, but they have to be very careful and not cross the lines of entrapment. So let's think about what criminal procedure is. Criminal procedure is what each state or the U.S. government, their procedures for how they will initiate and begin investigations, work toward criminal prosecutions, those type of things. With those, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, they carry certain guarantees for defenses and rights of those that are accused. We'll get into a few of those here, and we'll look at those in a couple of slides. All right, so we'll skip that one. Steps in criminal prosecution, they generally will include arrest. You get arrested, booked in. You're given a formal notice of charges. If you think back to when we were discussing the different levels of the court system, we have certain things here that happen in each level of that. Preliminary hearing to determine probable cause, an indictment, information, arraignment, and trial. And I won't go over the full procedure again like we did for last week's lecture. It's not a reason to really jump back over that. But now let's look at those amendments and how they protect us and businesses. So keep in mind that with these amendments, as we go through them, we're going to go through, I think it's 3 of them. But as we go through those, keep in mind that we're applying this to a business, individuals also, but a business. And the same way, for all intents and purposes, that it would apply to a individual, a citizen, a business gets that same application of the law for them. So the Fourth Amendment is the one that we understand it protects us against unreasonable search and seizures. This is one that calls for any search that is commenced upon or any warrant that is given to be a sworn testimony by law enforcement or a sworn affidavit by law enforcement to a member of the judicial branch, which is normally a judge. The judge is going to sign off on a warrant. And it will be about the specifics of the search or the warrant. If it's a writ of bodily attachment for someone to be arrested, it would be, the specific person they're looking for. But in a search warrant, it will be about the area that you're going to search. What items are you possibly looking for? It avoids the blanket, just go look and find whatever you want to find, and tunes it to items involved in crime A that will necessitate that crime or will tie the defendant or the accused to that crime in some way. If the crime is murder, we're not necessarily going in there. They're not going to go in and look for, pornography if it doesn't have anything to do with that crime. Now, if that's found in an incident of it and someone's found in possession of it, then charges can come from that. But normally they're looking for that specific stuff and that specific item. They can't go searching for something outside the parameters of the warrant. If it's in plain sight, found in the course of the investigation, that becomes a different issue. A search warrant is only issued when a judge determines that there is some type of probable cause for it to do it. Part of the affidavit that law enforcement has to fill out would be a very detailed list of why they think they should be able to go in there, swearing to the fact that they believe that these items could be present and what needs to go on for that. Once that warrant is issued, they can then begin a search of the identified area, looking for a person or the items that there is in the search warrant. If there's not a warrant, items found may still be admissible in evidence based upon things like the plain sight or commission of a crime or destruction of evidence type setting where they can seize an item because it's there, it's illegal, it's used right in the middle of a commission of a crime, they see it happening, or because someone's trying to destroy evidence in some way. Those exceptions are things like plain view, we've discussed. The item is right there, viewable for the officer. if there's a crime in process, destruction of evidence. Also, things like emergency and exigent circumstances. If someone gives consent for them to be searched or their uh, property to be searched. If the safety of an officer, the clothed pat search is done upon a questioning or an arrest for the protection of the officers, and an incident to a lawful arrest if something happens and they're arresting someone, they're searching them, they find weapons, or they are entering into a correctional facility, whether that's a county jail or whatever, and they have weapons, those things would be allowable for them to be confiscated as a search. Let's look at the Fifth Amendment. So the Fifth Amendment is most commonly known as the I plead the Fifth. People use it in all different types of settings. I'm not saying anything. I'm pleading the Fifth. The hands up, like, hey, you got me. I'm not saying anything though. I'm not letting you know anything. We do that to each other sometimes. Hey, I'm pleading the Fifth on this one. But in a criminal setting, that is a right to avoid the fact that you're going to self-incriminate and maybe agree to something that doesn't quite fit, but because of your statement could be construed as a confession. It could also just be a confession. You have a right not to confess, right? You don't have to confess to a crime. You have a right. It's the job of the government to prove guilt. So the Fifth Amendment prevents you from aiding them in their job or a business in what they're doing. So the right to due process is also part of it. That applies to your court proceedings. So they're fundamentally fair. One of the ways when we talked about what appeals court is, an appellate court, criminal proceedings, the court proceedings, the due process is one of the things that a appeal can be filed upon if due process is not followed the way it should. The right to be indicted by a grand jury for capital offenses and infamous crimes, and the right to be free from double jeopardy. So double jeopardy, that the way it's stated is not to be put twice in jeopardy for loss of life or those type of things. When we talk next week about intentional torts and we get into some of the compensation and stuff like that and how those go, we'll get to an area where it looks like we're ignoring double jeopardy, but double jeopardy doesn't apply. A criminal charge takes away liberty, where a libel suit, a lawsuit, would just take away monetary means. All right, so the Sixth Amendment then is where we get a lot of our court procedures and how you have a right to certain things within that system. Of course, you have a right to a speedy trial, a trial by jury, a public trial, an attorney, and a right to confront witnesses. The speedy trial is one that, depending upon the severity of the case, you will see that one waived often because the longer you have to build your defense, sometimes the better the defense is going to be. Trial by jury sometimes is waived, but I always stand by I'd rather have my fate in the hands of 12 than one. The likelihood of all 12 of those folks having a bad day on the exact same day, or that one judge having a bad day that morning, then I'd rather put my hands in the fate of the many other than the one. A public trial, an attorney, you have the right to counsel and the right to confront witnesses. So within these couple of amendments, we have covered what we consider the Miranda rights. All right, so the Miranda rights are read to a criminal defendant or someone who is possibly someone's being placed under arrest, someone being questioned about their role in a crime. And most people have heard those before. The real simple Miranda rights, the simplest version of them is you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one can be provided for you at the cost of the state. Do you understand these rights as they've been read to you? That's the real simple version. There are variations that are used. Some get a little bit more elaborate, but they all cover these basics that were set up in Miranda v. Arizona when an individual by the last name of Miranda was arrested, and because of and not knowing the rights that applied to them, uh, made statements and other things happen that cause them to be found guilty, cause them to go through the process, and they sued, and Miranda rights is what came out of that. The Sixth Amendment is designed to put transparency in criminal proceedings so that the government's not doing any type of secret uh, proceedings when it comes to criminal charges. They're not selectively prosecuting someone or using unfair tactics to do that. Now, some of the crimes that happen in the business world that we hear more about are white collar crimes. The name of this comes from the fact that business folks always wore white shirts for the longest time. You didn't see a lot of different color shirts still to this day. If you look across the spectrum, pretty much about with businesses, a lot of people wear a white shirt with their coats. It's just kind of the practice that's been there and kind of stays. So it's a white collar crime. It's committed by someone wearing a white collar on a shirt. So computer crimes, your cyber crimes are your newest advent in these. That's simply the use of a computer, communication device, some type of technology to commit a crime. You can imagine that the further we get into the AI realm and how AI is coming out, there will be more charges for that. The use of AI to steal someone's name, image, or likeness. We'll have some issues with that as we move forward. Then you have Racketeering and Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, the much easier way of saying that. It's a federal law intended to stop organized crime. When it was created, when RICO was first designed, it was meant to go after organized crime, specifically the Sicilian mafia working within New York and other areas of high crime. But since its creation, about 10% of those cases have been filed against who it was designed for. Instead, 75% of those cases have been used in businesses. It's designed in such a way that it works so well with businesses and other types of acts. RICO is designed to arrest many and get each level to maybe tell on the next level. His pure design is to get someone to tell on the next person up. So he can arrest a lot of lower level employees, then start getting into middle management, then into management, and then maybe even to ownership in a business if there's something going on. And what we're doing is saying that the person at the top of this pyramid, the RICO setup, and I'm sure you've seen them in whether it's a article of some sort or even on TV shows where they've used this, you have the one face at the top and then it branches down in like a pyramid or some type of tree branching down into each level below. The purpose is not so much to arrest that bottom level and get them convicted, but to build convictions upon each level as they move up to then take out the leader of that to make sure that the criminal charges really and truly lie where they should, if it can be proven that they were the head of this and calling all the shots from the beginning. Crimes against businesses can be things like larceny and embezzlement. These were real quick on that one slide earlier. Larceny is trespassery, taking and carrying away of personal property of another without or with the intent to deprive them permanently of the property. Taking something from a business that you do not plan on returning to it. Embezzlement's when you take another's property and then you claim that it's yours and you're depriving them of their lawful possession. They sound similar, but embezzlement is where you're not necessarily uh, just taking it to permanently deprive them of it in that way, but you're taking it to use it for your own. And that's kind of the difference in embezzlement. Larceny is more of the person to person type setting, to where embezzlement is what we hear in crimes, where an employee, normally someone who handles the books and takes care of the business in that way, will steal money from the business. Going back to the grocery store that I managed, we had a manager in there prior to me taking over the store. At the time, I was running the meat department, and we had a manager who was running the store, a young person, and the amount of money that they were transporting to the bank began to be too much for them, and they started taking a little bit here and there. They ended up, over the course of about 6 months, taking somewhere around $2,000, $2,500. We never really pinned down the amount, but it was around $2,000 to $2,500 that they removed as they were taking deposits to the store or to the bank from the store. When this was found out, just one second. At the point this was found out, the business owners decided not to press charges, but just dismiss this employee. The amount was not something they wanted to spend the money to go to court for. They dismissed the employee and barred them from any of their establishments they own. They own several different stores around the area, and so they barred them from going in there. Another crime against business is some type of false pretense. That's obtaining title to property of another person by some type of false use of in their identity or false papers, whatever it may be. The full intent here, though, when we look at intent and what intent has to be for a crime, is the intent to defraud that business in some way. We have robbery, which is larceny with the use of a threat of force. Burglary, which is under just the entry into a building with the intent to commit a crime or commit a felony. Extortion, that's just getting something from somebody by making a threat in some way. Bribery, which is normally tied to public officials when we think about what it is. It could also be to businesses to get them to act in a certain way. Forgery, this goes back to some of the issues with checks and a way that larceny and embezzlement, all these things can, be done through forgery. As a falsification of a document to defraud someone. The intent, once again, is to defraud them. Bad checks, knowing issuing a check that there's not money in the bank for, and most people don't use checks anymore. You use a card, and if you don't have the money, it just doesn't go through unless you have some type of overdraft protection. But when checks were the most prevalent way that individuals were paying for items, and some businesses still use these for simply for the tracking of transactions. But when this was done, if you knowingly were going around writing checks without any money in the bank, you knew you didn't have it, and you were just writing checks left and right, that would be a criminal charge that you could end up actually, after above a certain amount, end up in prison for. All right, so that kind of covers this. I told you it was not going to be real long. I'm going to stop the share real quick. I do plan to have a video after I grade the case studies that you just turned in. I plan to have a video based on those coming out. And once I do that, once I get those graded and I think about what I want to say and look it over and see, what needs to be covered, I'll put the video out, put an announcement so that you can watch it and make sure that you're following what we're looking for with those case studies. You'll also get comments from me on your individual case studies, but this will allow you to, kind of make adjustments based upon what is going on. So if you know that you did something that I talk about in the video for it, then make sure that you're correcting that. If none of it applies to you, then good job, and you keep doing what you're doing. If you're making getting full credit on this when you turn in, make sure that you still check comments and watch the video, because it could be that it was not something so egregious at this point that you would lose points off the score for it, but that same mistake could build and cause you to lose points at a later time. All right, so until the next video, stay safe and study hard.